away because I would like for everyone to check that out. But yeah, my mom was the big cooker, but she didn't really want us around in the kitchen. We would get in the way. So I was the professional table setter. That was my job for all meals and special occasions. Uh, but yeah, yeah, and I wanted to use this story as the inspiration, because as a way, as you had mentioned before, to keep these memories alive. As my mother passed in 2011, and my father the very next year, 2012, and so all the questions that we would want to ask, I was 35, they were still young. We didn't get to ask those questions for recipes, and not everything wasn't written down. So we lost a lot. So I didn't have things to reference except the funny stories that we have around food. So that was the inspiration.
Well, that makes sense, and that connects with a lot of family histories that were more orally passed down, and recipes that were passed down orally and not necessarily written down.
Mhm.
Uh, and sometimes that led to not having exact measurements or things like that. But it's so beautiful that you wanted to share this recipe as a way to pass it down to future generations in your family.
Yeah, yeah. My nieces who are 20 and 21, they called her Nana, and they were 5 and 6 when she passed, very young. So the memories, you forget certain things. And not only this, but I have several other artworks that, and I wasn't doing this intentionally, but I just thought, oh, this is a great story. Let me do this. And I look back and I'm like, you were really preserving your family memories. And that's been real important to me. And anytime that I can do that now, I'm going to do that. So yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, and I'm gonna go ahead and segue into sharing some excerpts from February from Natalie Duran, who whose recipes are weenies two ways. And the quotes from that backstory are: our proteins were served burnt and charred. Ask our tios, tias, and titis how they want their meats prepared. Well done, they declare. Pork chops ate like jerky, and hot dog weenies were a staple in every Tex-Mex kitchen. The hot dog weenie is America's favorite, and in South Central Texas households, the weenie, pronounced weenie, is served many ways. And that led me to quotes from the best ever quick and easy cookbook. Many people have hectic, busy lives these days with little time or desire to cook complicated meals every day. And the next from The Real Taste of Jamaica by Enid Donaldson, with an introduction by Barbara Gloden. Good Jamaican food is peasant food, unabashedly calorie laden, rich in memories for those who can recall. And that, just made me think of the fact that I was born and raised in Texas. And when I look at the image for February, it just really takes me back to the 80s. It takes me back to when I was a latchkey kid. And it takes me back to when my sister and I would warm up those one pot meals that my mom had prepared. She was an RN, so she was really busy. And exactly some of those ingredients that was the picture. My sister and I would have to dig those up sometimes too and prepare our own meals. So, in saying all that, um, what do you feel comfort food um, and preparing easy meals means for you nowadays?
Hi everyone, I'm Natalie Duran. I'm from San Antonio, Texas. Hi. Um, when reflecting on like the processed foods that I discuss in my story, I think of a lot of guilt and I think of shame and I think of how there's a lot of shame around poverty and then there's a lot of shame and how malign processed foods are in today's culture. They make you fat, they're unhealthy, they make you sick. I think of those things. Um, but in reflecting back in this whole process of what I wanted to represent for my story, I think about how there was always sustenance for my siblings and I, right? So like there was always food on the table, and no matter how charred your meat was or who prepared the weenies, there was food for us, which brought us together. And a younger version of myself might have been a little bit embarrassed to share or talk about poverty and all of these processed foods. But, just thinking back, there was always food. And there's probably some guilt if I would to eat some of this food right now, but you can't compare the taste of nostalgia. Like I can recall the hands that prepare these foods. I can recall the last time I ate, processed food and the joy of the comfort that it brought to me. And also in preparing for this project, I actually made a lot of this food. So, and I shared a lot of the weenas with my community, and I rolled crispy dogs in the corn tortilla and I fried them and I served them to my friends, and just watching how they connected to their childhoods and bringing them back to their mamas and their abuelos, and just like how much it connected us together, like brought a lot of joy. So it dismantled a lot of that shame and it dismantled a lot of that guilt. And that was definitely, it just made that whole thing pretty real and fun and healing also too.
Yeah, of course. I definitely, especially nowadays, there's a lot of talk about avoiding processed foods and things of that nature. So yeah, I can really identify. And I know a lot of us here can identify with that being a mention of what's going on with food nowadays. So, but it isn't that the joy and comfort that sometimes indulging in these foods is also really important. So I appreciate you sharing that with us today. And now let's see. I think we're going to do is go on to Krystle Lemonias, whose entry for June was the best brown stew mushroom with butter beans. That's my bad patois.
That's okay.
And the quote from the backstory for that month: we learned the basics of our Jamaican culture cuisines from our mother. But for me, cooking was more memorable with my sister. Our diet changed as we got older and explored alternative ingredients to improve our health. It had been years that we had kept a vegan diet, but yearned for some of the savory flavors familiar to our culture, which connected for me with Bryant Terry's Afro Vegan Farm Fresh African, Caribbean, and Southern Flavors remix. This quote from that: culturally appropriate food is an important criterion for determining what is healthy. And people of African descent need not look any further than our own historical foodways for better well-being. It is vital that we incorporate African and Afro-diasporic vegetables, grains, legumes, fruits, nuts, seeds, and cooking techniques into our kitchens, as well as this one from Decolonize Your Diet by Luz Calvo and Catriona Rueda Esquibel. Cooking a pot of beans from scratch is a revolutionary act that honors both our ancestors and future generations. And my question for you is, what do you feel comfortable talking about when it comes to being mindful of your health while still honoring the flavors and ingredients of your Jamaican heritage?
Thank you for that question, Andriana. Um, it was really reflective having the opportunity to talk about food and my relationship to it and relationship with others with food. My sister and I are estranged for some time, and so thinking about that recipe and cooking that with her has always been a really lovely memory to look back on. And I'm not even able to cook that recipe these days because it's just it becomes so overwhelming. But it's good to have these memories that, however, are locked into the vault that it is, you can look back so fondly. And my mom never liked cooking. And so, though my sister and I learned, Jamaican cuisine just because women of that time had to cook in Jamaica. I mean, I'm from the age group that maybe the last of the age group that women were still cooking and cleaning and doing all these things by hand. As maybe many women of that age group here in the US as well. And so I grew up watching my mom cook these meals. And my sister and I had to then learn because when we then immigrated to the US, my sister and I became the cooks of the household because my mom was at work. And so we had to care for ourselves and then care for her as she came home. So yeah, it's really fond memories and seeing how my relationship to food has also evolved because at that period of time I'm looking back at a time when I was vegan and I'm actually for all those out there, I'm not currently feeling vegan. I actually got sick traveling like about a year ago when I went to Ghana for which I am in right now for a trip and I got malaria. And so I lost a lot of weight. And so my diet has had to change again to build my body back. And so I think for me, food has always been this experience of relationship, who I'm in community with at that moment in time, and how that constantly shifts. Like for instance, my partner is Ghanaian, and so I end up now I'm cooking a lot of Jamaican Ghanaian fusion meals. Sometimes it's jollof and jerk fish, or it's like so it's ever changing, and I think that flexibility allows me to move with just what life and the experiences with others has to offer.
That's beautiful. And what a common thread through the stories that have already been shared, the memories, the connections, even sometimes even more so than like the food itself, it's those memories and those connections that eating those particular foods, or even if you're not able to cook those particular foods anymore, even the memories, looking at the recipe of thinking about those memories associated with those meals. That's really beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now we're going to move on to Ayana Kareem, whose entry is for August, an ode to agriculture. And so we're going to have a special treat here. And your poem led me to these quotes. We mentioned Decolonize Your Diet earlier by Luz Calvo and Catronia Rueda, Rueda Isabel. We think it is important to have gratitude for the food we eat as we are eating it, to be mindful of all the sacrifices that went into having food on our tables. Rather than disavowing the lives, the labor, and even the suffering that produced our food, we think it is important to acknowledge this complexity and be humbled by it. As well as this quote by Audre Lorde, which is Poetry is Not a Luxury. So will you do us the honor of reciting your poem, Ode to Agriculture?
Hello, peace and assalamu alaikum, which means peace be unto you, everyone. I just want to share this piece with you. Um, so it goes, an ode to agriculture. A love of this earth and her works, intricate systems leading seed to fruit. The sweetest mango can never be compared when shared. Patience towards a winding vines, a dance, a tango. Beyond just physical action, but divine. The feeling of dirt underneath your nails and between your fingers, an exotic exchange of grounding energy, electric force, that first taste of the season. Give it to the bees, give it to the ants, give it to the critters and crawlies making all this possible. Honor what makes you pause in the garden. Something about it makes the soul unharden. As you pluck the sweet and savory flesh of this earth, remember its true worth. Beyond a dollar in its monetary value, though ever increasing with reduction, scarcity, scarcity, a scary reality. But we stewards must move and tally with dear Earth's love in mind. Remember the tango, the beaten step. Remember the give and take. Remember, we are each other's breath. Abundant is this earth, and we should enjoy of all its fruits. Just hold on to true meaning, upward from the root. Yes. So that was Ode to Agriculture. Um, in finding inspiration for this piece, if you don't mind me just speaking on it for a brief moment, in finding inspiration for this piece, I was really thinking about some of my work in community. And I've done things such as set up produce distribution sites and thinking about the connection of where our food comes from and how people have access to certain levels of food. So it led me to in setting up certain produce distribution sites and working in local urban farms and doing volunteer work. I've been able to see where certain food comes from and how it can go through community, but also how there can be struggles to access to certain levels of food, and that we need to be better stewards of these processes, especially to be able to create better channels for other individuals. Um, I felt like in speaking in this poem specifically, I found the beauty in working in these gardens and these spaces. You find an electric force. It's the beauty of Allah. I'm Muslim, so that for me comes to a place where it led me to talk about being a steward of the earth. So that's the inspiration behind that as well, and really what helped inspire that poem too. Yeah.
Super cool. And yeah, and it definitely reflected that inspiration. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'm going to now go on to Meg Ellis, whose entry was for September, buckwheat and corn cakes. And Meg Ellis is actually here with us in person today. And I'll start with these quotes from the backstory of the buckwheat corn cakes. My maternal grandmother was fully blind. Grandpa's method of stocking the kitchen was Wonder Bread, Fleischmann's margarine, Campbell's soup, Kraft singles. About these grandparents, I experienced delayed onset concern for their nutrition. In response, my own mother rose valiantly to her determination, and gender role compliance to fill the family cook-shaped hole in our clan. And then Meg and her family spent time in Lagos, Nigeria from 1987 to 1992, moving there when Meg was 5, where she experienced ephemeral but indelible my brief foray into the carnival world of food and kitchens left its bite marks, and I still feel them buzzing like a bruise under the skin or under the surface of my skin. I love our kitchen, messy as it is, but to be honest, I don't actually like cooking. The food is just a vehicle. What I crave is its ability to transcend time and distance and return me to the childhood delight of new flavors, as if memory is locked in my taste buds and I can recover and reclaim those experiences from so long ago if I just find the right flavors. Which led me to Marcus Samuelson's Marcus Off Duty, the recipes I cook at home. And the quote, I remember what I eat. There are still journals. I use those memories to make food where the comfort of home is an ingredient. And my question for you, Meg, is how do you achieve those special flavors that allow you to travel back in time to those childhood memories?
Thank you for the question. And first, I just want to say what an honor it is to be among this group of artists and folks in the community. Truly inspired and continue to be amazed by the work and the impressions that these folks are leaving on me. So my story mentions my experience as a child, not much older than young Kareem here in the audience, moving overseas, uprooting my entire childhood understanding of what food was and how people ate it and prepared it. And so for me, it's like archaeology into my own life, because it was also before the digital age. So there's not like social media posts or, pictures of me. They're all in photo albums at my parents' place. But to stay, so the archaeology comes in from a lot of curiosity about different foods that I encounter and have to kind of be ready to go, wait, I think I've had that before. Do I know that flavor? Is that a cumin? Like, what is going on there? And then be ready to be almost like a detective to figure out what it is that's bringing up for me, and what friend it was. Was it an Indian friend? Was it an Israeli friend? Like kind of digging and just questioning everything. And then just keeping a really well-stocked kitchen so that when because I don't really like to cook, I have to kind of trick myself into it. And so I don't, when I think about my time in the kitchen as project-based rather than recipe-based, I have a much better time. And so when I can kind of iterate and come at it from a scientific mindset, or sort of the first this and then that, until we get to the final project, I'm much happier in the kitchen. And I also am sustaining myself. So it's kind of a win-win, but and then trusting my intuition to just like grab that spice jar that's not in the recipe, but I'm like, I think this is going to work. And that's something that, because I did not grow up with grandmas who cooked. My mom, I don't know, I think she was just reading cookbooks like cover to cover. I never saw her just like whip something together. She wasn't that kind of cook. So I'm sort of just like figuring out what it means to have this base of food understanding and sort of sensation, but then how do you match it to culinary arts to deliver the product that you want? So that sounds very sterile and not very like community or fun or friendly, but hopefully that answers the question a little bit about like how I find connection and inspiration to those ingredients that I'm always looking for.
Angle it more towards y'all there. Yeah, it does. And well, and again, there's that connection to Natalie's giving away there. That gives that connection again to it being more about the memories that the food invokes, and then too, again, how a lot of times people don't really have the time to get into being in the kitchen all the time. And it's been like that for many generations now. And so, yeah, it's rare that, I mean, it's the same thing for me. I mean, I was talking about being a latchkey kid as well. And my mother being a nurse, she couldn't, be in the kitchen all day. And I cook out of cookbooks. I was sharing with Melisa earlier this week. I've been enjoying this new show, Clash of the Cookbooks. Phoebe Robinson, yeah. And so, yeah, cookbooks are wonderful. And it's really exciting that y'all shared these recipes to try out and follow too when should someone find the time. So no, that's yeah, it did answer the question. And yeah, there's no shame in not liking the cook, as many of us here. So no words on that. And then so now I'm gonna move on to Melisa Gerecci here, the December entry, and it's time traveling eggs. And the quotes from the backstories for those recipes. When I'm hosting friends, or maybe just in the mood for something decadent, I make chilbert. Later, I learned my grandmother made chilbert regularly in the 1960s for my dad and his sisters growing up in Turkey. And from the road eggs, as kids, my sister Denise and I dreaded road trips with our dad. We would drive from Fort Worth to Colorado Springs, once to San Francisco in the brown Ford Econoline van my dad used for his retail business. Specifically, we dreaded his food preparation techniques. No need for a cooler or even a lunchbox. Just boil a dozen eggs and a dozen potatoes, run everything under cold water, bag to go. And this made me think of a quote from Marcus Samuelson's Marcus Off Duty Again. One of the things I think about when I'm cooking with kids is there's no kids music in Africa or in Jamaica or in India. There's no kids food either. You find several generations together, all experiencing the same thing at the same time. And American kids today have been exposed to a world of flavors that I have never, ever heard of when I was young. So I don't cook down to kids, and I don't think the idea of making something different for them is a good one. And with that being said, my question for you is, what do you feel comfortable sharing about how you came to have a deep appreciation for these egg featuring meals, especially in terms of the turnaround regarding the road eggs?
Never knew eggs would play this huge of a role in your life after childhood. Thank you so much, Andrea. So I wanted to kind of look at, as you're going through life as a young person, trying to understand where you're coming from, trying to understand what is this home that you're growing up in? How is it like other homes? How is it different? And particularly in a bicultural home, some of those differences do feel acute. I remember growing up eating some very delicious Turkish meals, Middle Eastern meals that my mother would prepare. She learned to cook for my father. Also, my grandmother lived with us, and she would make these elaborate dishes. But also just like trying to understand where my father was coming from, less so geographically, culturally, and more psychologically. Like what is our idea of the culture, and then what is the reality of that experience? I think of my father as a intensely practical man, like pragmatic to a fault, which perhaps many people with
an immigration story in their background can relate to. And I think when I started making Chilber after pandemic, when we had a lot of time on our hands, my son Kareem had just been born, we're at home kind of experimenting with things. And I was asking him about it. And he just seemed so familiar, like, oh, we ate that all the time. I said, how? This is so flavorful and fragrant and involved. No, my mother made that. So getting back to your comment earlier about some of the gendered experiences of making food, sourcing the food, thinking of the recipes, thinking of the variety that would be served. But then also when I had, as a young person, I looked at the road eggs as not particularly delightful, but as an adult, I found this incredibly practical. There's no plastic packaging involved. You have a carbohydrate and a protein right there. It's very economical. Like, this is actually a brilliant dish. And again, asking my father, where did you get this harebrained idea to just boil things and put them in a bag? He goes, oh, my mother taught me how to do that. So here's the same person able to create these lavish dishes that are so regionally specific and flavorful, and also in scenarios that call for it, being able to make something useful and delightful out of what needs to be done.
Yeah.
So when I think of the quotation you read about how does that relate to not cooking down to kids, like I really, since becoming a parent, excavated my own upbringing and sort of looking at what you were doing. Am I doing this reflexively? Am I doing this intentionally? What am I modeling? What am I leaving out? And I think of a really beautiful quotation I heard recently that raising a child is witnessing the emergence of an adult. And so not having to think that there is so much you have to be doing, but just this is a person and a being who is at some level intact and has a dignity that I am a student of as much as a daily teacher of. So it's, yeah, I wanted to contribute a story that looked at both like high culture and low, and moving between places and moving through the different seasons of life and how you look at yourself and where you're coming from.
Thank you for that. Yes, it's exactly, it's a journey. And again, going back to memories, sharing with future generations, practical preparations of food, all of these threads really connect all of your recipes and all of your stories. And looking at the time, it looks like we do have time to go into these general questions that I have, these last two questions that I have for the cohort here. And then we'll have some time to open it up to questions to the audience here. And I'll also, don't worry, virtual audience, I will also check the chat for questions from you as well. So have a couple more quotes here. Decolonize your diet. I love that cookbook. And so I'm super excited to add the cookbook lookbook to my cookbook collection as well. But going into this quote, we believe that any cookbook and discussion of food preparation that doesn't address the gendered condition of labor may be seen to reinforce oppressive relations. In every household, communal living space, or kapuli, the division of labor needs to be open to discussion and negotiation. In concrete terms, this means identifying the different kinds of work essential to feeding the group, gardening, meal planning, shopping, cooking, or cleanup, and dividing these tasks into ways that are equitable. I'm just gonna open it up to anyone in the cohort right now who has any thoughts or comments about that those quotes there from Decolonize Your Diet.
I guess I could lead with this, or I could discuss this a little bit. So I'm actually one of the cohort members who identifies as a non-binary. I identify as non-binary, or I am non-binary. My partner is a chef and he does a lot of cooking, and I also do a lot of cooking. And in preparation for our San Antonio pop-up, he, along with Melissa and I, was in the kitchen completely just going to work and really doing the emotional labor as well as cooking with Melissa. And in terms of just separating the binary of cooking, like I don't it's more of a like not conforming to these like gender constructs, and also just kind of reflecting back, and like my sister has a big family and her children kind of divide up those things. We were raised similarly. And so it it doesn't ever strike me that there are roles in the kitchen because we're such a big family and everybody is taking hands and participating. Um, my nephew really likes to cook a lot, and he has kind of, I think, maybe this is more of like a conforming kind of thing for gender, has taken to the grill. So he likes to like prepare proteins. He has, um, kind of perfected the skill of, there's really like temperature levels, there's different kind of things, but he's always providing for his family and cooking for his family. But I think in terms of the binary of gender, like in my household, we definitely take turns, and there's lots of different experimentation that happens, and we don't it is equitable, and we don't consider that it's a labor of the gender binary specifically. I guess that's my contribution.
Yes. I think that really it hits home for me, the idea that that working in a kitchen can and should be up for discussion and equal spread among the participants in the household, because that was not the case for the household that I grew up in. Like Monifa said, my mom was the queen of the kitchen. Your job is to set the table and then maybe peel these potatoes, but get out. And my dad never cooked anything. In fact, my dad, I don't remember him cooking anything besides like a TV meal if mom was out of town or warming up leftovers. In fact, one fight I remember my parents getting into was because my mom was cooking something and my dad went through, in his intention to be economic and efficient, he turned the oven down. So like, I think that illustrates the disconnect between them. Can you believe it?
Oh, no.
And so just the idea that they could have been talking about, do you like spending this much time in the kitchen? What if I did the grocery shopping? Or what I kind of like, I read about this food that maybe I want to incorporate, is like revolutionary to me. Not so much in my personal life, because my partner and I, he actually does the bulk of the cooking. And on reflecting, I think that my comment earlier about not liking to cook is actually a nicer way to say I am rebelling against cooking because of the gendered notion that it takes for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I see that Krystle has hand up. Yes,
Yes. Thank you for letting me contribute. I just wanted to add that I think for me, what comes to mind is how the ingredients can change with migration or immigration. Um, Something that I have been, I think I've always been privy to just because of cost and watching my mom afford food, as I believe Natalie shared a little bit earlier, in thinking about cost-effective ways to have still very nutritious meals. And even in the lack of that, being really creative by eating what is I guess known for an area. For instance, in the US, in Jamaica, we have greens called kalalu, and that's cooked down into like what in America it becomes more like a collard green stew. And coming here to the US, you may want to always try to buy the thing that you got back home. But due to the importation and how expensive it is to bring these things here to the US, you kind of have to improvise by using the collard greens, but cooking it with the flavors of the spices that may still quite affordable to achieve that similar flavor. And so that's something that I've had to do a lot of in the recent years, being a student but not anymore, and thinking about how can I continue to achieve those favors. And it made me also consider that when you think of people who were enslaved and brought to the Caribbean, the flavors that they developed also changed from the flavors that are coming from Ghana and Nigeria and Sierra Leone and all these places in West Africa. And so I kind of think of myself within a similar uh, spirit of really adapting and carrying a bit of what is familiar while being okay with creating something new.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. Yes. Does anybody else have any thoughts along these issues? Okay, I have one more. I don't know why I took my glasses off. I keep doing that. And Afro-Vegan, work is off duty and they out. There are references to music to listen to while you're cooking or while you're eating. And as well as in all of the cookbooks, there are images, photographs, or illustrations. Whoever wants to share about this, why is it important to experience various types of creative expressions simultaneously?
Ambiance. It
Ambiance.
creates ambiance. I think that like there's a connection to all of that. I'm a longtime hospitality worker, and I think that all parts are important. And so setting the mood and setting the ambiance is elevating the experience and the connection to it. I can think of the same record that I would play regularly every time I wanted to like invite people over, and like how I would prepare. It was like this Gel Gilberto and Stan Getz record that I would always play, and just hearing the samba, like it would just set the mood. It's the ambiance. It's what gets it flowing for you, like how do you want to elevate this moment? And that like that connection to music is really important for ambiance. I would say that's what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick.
Okay.
I love that we were talking about how some of the stories and recipes are passed down verbally, or they're you just pick it up by spending time with the people who make these dishes, and then you kind of learn their ways. So much information is communicated non-verbally. And so sound and texture and taste and feel, that comes through color, that comes through the ambiance that Natalie's describing, that comes through like we remember things because of how they smelled or how they felt. And there's just like a connection there, since food is a physical thing. We do a lot digitally, but we still have to eat, in real life. But that I think that's why like all the different ways of information and input coming in is so powerful.
Thank you for sharing that. And I see Krystle, I acknowledge, I see your hands up. I got it.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add that yes to everyone with the ambiance, but for me, I found that if I don't have a good vibe to cook, the food not going to taste right. And even like certain vibes for different meals is like essential. Like if I'm cooking my partner's food, a Ghanaian food, I have to put on some Afro beats. It's like get the music, it just gets sets the rhythm right. I don't know. And when I don't feel the vibe, I just don't cook because I just know it's gonna just be half of what it should be.
No, I mean, there are always mentions that love has to be an ingredient in the food. So yeah, that sounds very important. Yeah, and that's a good rule of thumb. Just being like, if you're not feeling the vibe, don't even do the cooking. That's so good. Anybody else?
It's a good way to get out of it, right? I'm not feeling
It
the
is.
vibe. I can't go tonight. Can't go tonight, not feeling the vibe. Yeah.
I just want to add, I take that approach when I'm making any kind of art. If I'm feeling sideways, you know what I mean? Like I love to sew. I'm anybody else who sews, you don't touch it. And you're not feeling right because it's going to mess up. It's going to be a hot mess. Yeah. I feel that.
It's so true. Yeah, you're not feeling the right vibes. Just don't do it. That's yes, I love it. That's right. The wisdom. Well, I think this is a good time to open it up to the audience for questions. I'm gonna be keeping an eye out here in the chat for anybody that's attending virtually. Does anyone here in person have any questions for the cohort members here? And y'all got to experience the textures and smells of some of the ingredients and got to look at the beautiful imagery. Some of you haven't yet. Yes, hold on right quick. Let me pass you the mic.
Oh, thank you. I didn't get to experience this. I had to drive through traffic, but I'm very glad that I was able to make it to this. Thank y'all. Just out of curiosity, have the cohorts, have y'all found that the other members in that cohort have influenced your cooking now after working together and being part of this project?
Did y'all hear the question? Okay, wonderful. Oh, yes, I can. How has your interacting with other members of the cohort influenced your cooking now?
I can share. Melisa, Meg, and I did a pop-up for Austin Zine Fest, and we did a little Tex-Mex fusion with the chillbur. So we decided that we were going to eat chillbur for breakfast. And then Meg bust out a bag of tortilla chips and then some avocado. And then suddenly we're doing some chilburquiles, which actually made its way to San Antonio. So I think in preparing and experimenting with that, we created our own. Are we doing East Medi Tex-Mex? Because Tex-Med did sounded like a clinic. So it's been a lot of fun just experimenting and in eating together also. So curious about if y'all got to eat any food in Newark. Meditex. No, East Meditex. But it's delicious. The chillbird, and you just, chilaquiles, for those not familiar, is there's like a tortilla chip, and there's some chile and different kind of variations. We had accoutrements of like tomato, onion, cilantro, and avocado, and we mixed it up, and it was a whole new thing. We're gonna start a business. I'm just kidding. We're totally joking.
Thank you, Natalie. Jesse, thanks for the great question. Definitely with Ayana's piece and Yvette's piece, both of which kind of looked at how food and planet are so closely wound up. I think I have been like more curious looking at ingredients, thinking like, what am I putting into the earth? What is the earth putting into me? And it's something I've been mindful of, but just seeing it expressed both in Yvette's, like looking at the history of the tortilla and corn growing in Mexico, and Ayana's looking at the fruit coming up from the root. Just like seeing it in those different art forms reminded me of how, like really how interconnected what we eat, because we do it daily and there's a lot of people.
Yeah.
What kind of impact that has on the earth and how we can be mindful of that.
Yes, thank you. Anyone else from the cohort want to answer Jesse's question? Okay. Do we have any other?
I want to respond a little bit. So I would say in working with this cohort, not only has like my thoughts around the way that I am like eating has changed, but also my thoughts around like I feel like everything around food, just because we end up touching on so many different aspects. Like we touch on like the communal aspects. So when we were able to talk through some of our stories and get to know like each other, we got to know we formed another community within that. So that like creates a like its own base, and then you like start talking about your own recipe. Like we shared each other's recipes, so then that got me thinking about like different ways that I could be cooking my food, but also like sharing space and things like that. So I think beyond just thinking about the preparing of the food itself, I think that like in working through this project, we've like really connected in a way that shows the ability of the power of food.
Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have questions?
Chat.
I didn't see one pop up.
Got it.
Another question has come to mind for me, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up here. I'll ask one more time to see if there's any questions from the audience, but how has working on the cookbook lookbook influenced your visual art practice going forward now?
I can speak to that again. So it kind of, in working on the cookbook lookbook, this has been the most, I would say, I keep repeating this, but this has been like the easiest, most flowing, natural kind of project to work with everyone on, and and to produce a well-crafted project as well in its wholeness. I think has really put my mind in a place where like no, like if I'm working on a project again, it needs to be, or in an artistic space, it needs to look like this. Like it needs to have a certain level, especially if I'm working with like a group of other artists. Like it needs to have this level of wholeness that acknowledges each of the artists, that feels like it's connecting community, feels like you are able to not only provide space for your personal vision, but to be able to show each other's work and really be able to flow with each other. I think this is something that I think is really beautiful that we've been able to be a part of, and I'm eternally grateful. So
Thank you for sharing that. I see Monifa has hand raised. I acknowledge.
Yeah. So I halfway through I realized that moving forward, um, aside from the sewing, but when it comes to any digital work or any other kind of visual artwork, I want to work collaboratively. Um, Full stop. Because I enjoy the process that much. So I'm just working on calling that in, let the universe bring the community around and see what we can create together if it feels right. Um, it feels right. So I just want to say thank you to this group for real. Yeah. Mhm.
I think it's been incredibly enlightening, and also just um all the ways that everybody has um shared their work. We've all just kind of, for me, it's been a process of seeing it in all ways. So after our Pressa House Gallery pop out in San Antonio, we were talking about how do we continue on as a collaborative, what we will do we want to stick with food, and also just kind of like, oh, I have all these ideas, or this is what I want to do, but like also seeing the ways that like even tangible things about food, um, how they make their way. We were talking about repurposing things that like are food based, but like have containers, and how like they become reprocessed. And it's just like kind of these things, this continuation, this theme of food, but storytelling through food. And um also to reiterate what Monifa said, like it's just been an incredible experience. It's been totally life changing, honestly, just to hold space for each other and unpack our stories and kind of go through our work. It's been very special, and I'm so appreciative of everybody and all their work, and you all for joining us and participating in our artist talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us virtually. Thank you all for being here in person. Thank you to Deep Vellum Books for hosting this event and featuring the Cookbook Lookbook. It has been an honor to moderate this talk with the members of the cohort that joined us today. I can't speak. And the collective, the cohort. Thank y'all so much. So yeah, that's it.
Andrea, thank you so much for your thoughtful questions, your moderation, your spending time with the words and the images. We were very fortunate to have some grant support at the beginning of all of this that would let us experiment with printing formats and different ways of sharing the work with the world. So I would just invite everybody who is here to please walk around the tables, handle the materials, see what they smell like, touch the words, look at the pictures, and take an egg. Right. Yes, our website is on the hard-boiled eggs scattered around. Please grab one for the road. And good night. Thank you, everybody.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for
Bye.
having me. It was great to be a part of you all.
Wonderful. Thank you. I've listened to the hidden critique too, Krystle. I've listened to the episode. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and it's been wonderful learning about all of your work, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to do so. I appreciate that.
Beautiful. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night.
Good
Thank
night.
you. You too.
You have a good night.
I will not
It's the Natalie show.
spill my, and see, there I go again, just like taking my glasses off. I'm like, where is that? There it is. Stop.